Hello, my name is Jim Hubner, Chairman of the Cape Elizabeth Memorial Day Parade. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we are unable to gather at the town's War Veterans Memorial on Memorial Day. However, as a community, we are still able to honor those who died in active military service, remembering all those who sacrificed for us to provide our freedoms today. We hope you and your family use this presentation to remember in your own way the men and women of the military.
Oh, say can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
The Gettysburg Address by Abraham Lincoln. 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether proper and fitting that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Before I recite the poem In Flanders Fields, I want to tell you some things about the author and circumstances around the poem so you can better understand and appreciate it. The poem was written by Major John McCrae, a physician in the Canadian 1st Field Artillery. He wrote it in the spring of 1915 during what we call World War I, but what was then known as the Great War. At the time, his unit was engaged in a very bloody battle in the Ypres salient, which is located in the Flanders section of Belgium. Now, McCrae was no stranger to war, for he had fought in the Boer War in South Africa, but he later said that his Boer War experience did not prepare him for the level of death and destruction he witnessed during the spring of 1915. He was also no stranger to literature. Before World War I, he was an instructor at the University of Toronto Medical School. While there, he had authored several medical texts and dabbled in poetry. Let me describe the scene at the time. McCrae's aid station was a hollowed-out area dug into the side of a canal. Occasionally, soldiers near the top of the canal would be hit and blown back or rolled down into his aid station. During one stretch of the battle, he was operating on soldiers for nearly 17 straight days with very little rest. The soldiers who didn't make it were buried in a makeshift cemetery in a field near the aid station. During that stretch, there was one death which greatly affected him. On May 2nd, 1915, Lieutenant Alexis Helmer, a friend and former student of his from the university, was killed by an artillery round. McCrae presided over his burial that night because there was no chaplain available. The next day, McCrae was still very upset over Helmer's death, and at one point took a break from his duties, grabbed a pad of paper and a pencil, went outside, sat down on the tailgate of an ambulance and started writing. At the same time, a young Sergeant Major, Cyril Atkinson, was delivering mail. He had some for McCrae, saw him sitting on the ambulance and headed his way. He noticed McCrae was busy writing, so he stood off to one side and waited patiently. Atkinson said that McCrae would occasionally look up, glance around, and then continue writing. After a short while, McCrae stood up, handed the pad of paper to Atkinson, took his mail, and went back to work. Atkinson looked at the newly written poem and said that it essentially described what was going on around him in 20 minutes it took McCrae to write it. The sounds of the battle, the machine guns, the rifle fire, the artillery explosions, the occasional lulls in the fighting when the smoke would clear and you could see the sky and hear the birds sing, the wind blowing, and the thousands of freshly blooming poppies in the nearby field. For you see, poppy seeds will lie dormant for years and will only grow in freshly turned soil. And the freshly turned soil that spring of 1915 was not from the farmers preparing for their spring planting, but from the many, many graves of the newly fallen soldiers. In Flanders fields, the poppies blow. Between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place. And in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved. And now we lie in Flanders fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you, from failing hands, we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders fields.